Time not healing the wounds for the Seminoles so far. How will this Heisman race be remembered? And portal news, and more portal news. This is the College Game Day Podcast for Wednesday, December 6th. Army-Navy week as College Game Day will head to Foxborough for Army and Navy coming up on Saturday. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel here. And Pete, a lot of times I've noticed historically in this now 10th season of the 14 playoff, there certainly hasn't been controversy to this level, save maybe in TCU quarters in 2014, the first year of the playoff. But usually it dissipates after a couple of days. Now we have politicians saying they're going to sue, people pounding the table and pounding the fist, and no good resolution is going to come from this. It's going to satisfy all parties. What are you at all surprised that usually that it hasn't died down much after a couple of days, as it often does?
I'm most surprised, Rece, that the first 9 years we never ended up in a taffy poll like this. I mean, honestly, if you look at it statistically, and I wrote this ad nauseum 11 years ago, the math is bad. The math is bad. The math is bad. You cannot have 5 power conference teams and then crown champions and then squeeze them into 4 spots. Plus, some teams would argue that they deserve two teams in here, and some leagues have gotten 2. The Big Ten and the SEC over time, and so it just never made sense, and they kind of just avoided stepping on the rake for these 9 years. And look, year one, I certainly don't want to discount TCU and Baylor's exclusion, but that was nothing compared to this. Now, if Gary Patterson was listening, I'm sure he would throw his AirPods out,
and throw his guitar at you too.
Yes, that's. Then I wouldn't have to listen to him sing, so that might not be terrible.
I like Gary. I like Gary singing. He's a good singer.
Yeah, I'm a Northeast guy, that's not my genre. But anyway, just gently busting Gary's chops. But I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole from 14. But I am going to say this was destined to implode, and they navigated it to the point where it finally didn't work. Now, should we have U.S. senators and people grandstanding? And I don't know. Of course not.
No, we shouldn't.
Do I have a ridiculous amount of empathy for the Florida State players, coaching staff, fan base? Absolutely. I really do. I said a few times on here, really thought they earned their way in, really thought they had an elite team. I think just how good their defense was maybe got lost in a little bit of this. Their defense gave them a chance to play and beat any of those teams there, period. Their offense did not have as good of a chance without Jordan Travis, but I just don't think when you look at that accumulation of talent on the defensive line, how well their secondary played, the blend of experience. I mean, that is a vintage FSU defense loaded with NFL dudes. So, yes, but when the arguments become performative is when I tune out. So I went right into I kind of dove headfirst into the portal on Monday and left the screaming for those on the old Twitter.
And I want to point this out, sort of to re-emphasize the point that I've made time and time again on selection days over the years, both in football and basketball, my steadfast belief that performance does not validate or invalidate results. And I said that not about the playoff per se. If Georgia goes into the Orange Bowl and annihilates Florida State, that does not mean the committee got it right. It also doesn't mean that Georgia belonged in the playoff. And if Florida State goes in and beats Georgia or annihilates Georgia, same thing. Now, it will help. It will help the see I told you so if the offense performs well against that level of defense. But it still doesn't mean right or wrong because it's different circumstances, different levels of motivation. Both coaches and programs are saying we're going to show up mad and we're going to prove a point. Well, that's on now December 6th and a few days prior to that. Once we get to the end of December and there's been portal talk, and are you going pro, and you're getting hosed, and why are we playing this game again? Hey, we should be in the playoff. When you hear all of that for a month, there's no way to accurately predict whether either, both, or neither team will come out in the mindset that it might have otherwise had. So what happens in that Orange Bowl shouldn't change anybody's perspective. It doesn't prove a point. If Florida State gets beat by 50, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have been in the playoff. It just doesn't. And the same would go on the other side. If Georgia wins by 50, it doesn't mean, they should have been in over Alabama or Texas or Washington. I was going through some of these numbers, and it's really funny because for years the people, and I include myself among this crowd, I think when you have the bad math, as you pointed out, that it can't just be the 0 in the lost column. It can't just be the 1 in the lost column as opposed to the 2 in the lost column. There has to be some measure of evaluation, subjective evaluation about how those records occurred. So you look at Connelly's SP Plus rankings. Washington's undefeated. They're 11th. Now, SP Plus and FPI both are predictive, so they look forward as opposed to looking back, and that becomes an entirely different type of evaluation about how appropriate that is when selecting teams to go in. But they're 11th. But in the SP Plus forward rankings, you would have Penn State, who's not even getting sniffed. Penn State's 4th, in Bill's SP Plus. So, there's a lot of it to try to digest and say what's best. And it's been, it sort of hit at the right time for the committee because, or the wrong time, right in this regard. At least they won't have to answer questions about how you screwed it up last year when they get to next year under the new format. And, much has been made about the ill-fated alliance and whether we would have had it. But that's all hindsight stuff too. That's like going back. That's like cherry picking the argument if you favor Alabama or favor Texas or favor Florida State or Georgia or Ohio State for that matter to get into the playoff. That's like going back and cherry picking an argument and saying, see, that one little point. That was a big deal. It was not wise. I mocked it at the time, the alliance. And, but to come back now and say, well, they got what they deserved. It's just a little historical footnote that reminds us all to be careful when you get mad. About yes. Be careful when you get mad about making grand decisions and grand proclamations and painting yourself into a corner that they eventually were pulled out of because we have the 12-team playoff next year and could have had it a year sooner. But it's a complex argument for sure.
Yes, and I think when you act emotionally instead of at the behest of your constituency, sometimes there's these are the consequences that we're living through and dealing with now, and it's too bad, man, because Rece, this would be an unbelievable 12-team playoff. Yeah. I really think if you step back and look at why is college football top heavy this year, right? Why? I'm sorry, I should say this. Why is there parity up top? Because let's face it, Alabama could beat Michigan, Michigan could beat Alabama, Texas could beat Washington. I have no conviction. Right. I have opinions on those games, and we'll break them all down here. But this isn't they're an 18-point favorite. So how did college football get to the point where the top is this good and this even? And I just think that this is a byproduct of the portal era that we're in. The Florida States of the world can cherry pick a bunch of guys like Jared Verse and Keon Coleman, and they can go win the ACC through that. I think that we've lost a little bit of the middle class because if you're a redshirt sophomore at Mississippi State who hasn't played, you're going to go start at Western Kentucky, right? The freedom of movement has lessened some of college football's monopolistic tendencies. And there were some monopolistic runs, be it by the SEC, be it by Georgia for a couple of years, be it by Alabama before then, be it by Clemson for a good run. And I just think, and you just look at some of the guys rolling through the portal from even Clemson in the last in the last couple days, guys that wouldn't have left in previous years. Bo Collins and the really good safety, because they can go somewhere else. They can have opportunities somewhere else. They can go play in different systems. They can go play for different coaches. So I really think the world is flat on top of college football. Although you can cherry pick and do that, it is sort of given the top a little bit more evenness and parity. I mean, look at the portal. Look at Michael Penix is a portal kid. Jalen Polk is a portal kid. Dylan Johnson, the tailback, was Mississippi State transfer, right? Like, so you can accentuate your roster at the top, and I do think it has hurt the middle class, like the upper middle class, a little bit. Those guys can't quite swing as much. So, but the point is, like, this is a boom era for the sport. I mean, we are in it right now. You know what I mean? They're gonna be writing books about this season in the upcoming years. And I just think that generally, when you step back, is a great thing for the sport. And there were some years, Rece, where you throw the 12-team playoff field out and be like, okay, that would be cool that they, Ole Miss would go to Wisconsin and play in a snow, and there would be fun matchups. But these matchups are different. Like, there is more quality 1 to 12 this year than there has been in any year the last decade.
And you know that next year that, much like in some ways maybe last year would have been a good year to go back to the BCS. And just had Georgia and Michigan play in the championship game, though I want to give TCU credit. They beat Michigan, but pretty clear at the end of last season that, Georgia and Michigan had performed at a higher level, and TCU hadn't won its conference championship and all that. Last year would have been a year in which everyone would have accepted a BCS-style national championship game. We're getting that next year, don't you? You know that whoever number 1 and number 2 are next year are going to be 13-0, and number 3 is going to be 11-2, and number 5 is going to be 10-3. You know this, don't you, Pete?
Well, I do think the way records are going to look in the top 10 are going to change, Rece, right? Like, as scheduling changes and evolves, like a 3-loss playoff team, it's going to be like you're in the NFC East or whatever, right? Like, that's just the way it is. And look, the regular season games are going to be great. I don't want to be the archetype of the dour, pessimistic, cynical Northeast guy, right? Like, when we're standing there on the sideline for Ohio State, Michigan, or how about A&M? I looked at week 1 for next year because I'm sick this morning. Where's Clemson, Georgia, week 1, and Notre Dame at A&M week 1. That'll be some fun decision making for our programming friends to decide where our traveling television show is going to go. And I did not. There might be 1 or 2 others in that neighborhood. I glanced at it very quickly, but I just thought, I was just kind of like, I wonder what week 1 looks like. And FBS Schedules, great site. Love that site. If you need to know the 2027 non-con of Air Force, they've got it dialed in. So I went and looked, and I was like, oh, those are two pretty pretty good matchups. But losing from this point forward in college football is not going to be as punitive. It's just very simple at the high end. It's not going to be as punitive. There's going to be these great games, these great events. People are still going to care. The tickets are still going to cost a lot of money. The energy is still going to be unmatched, and that's what makes one of the things that makes the sport great. It's just an hour after the game, they're going to be like, all right, we didn't get a bye.
Yeah.
Not our hopes and dreams are down.
Yeah,
and that's just consequences we're going to live with.
I said Monday that because of this situation with Florida State that, not that I've been opposed to expansion, but I've really been pounding the drum that we're losing some of that. I'm not backing off of that. We're going to lose something, and we feel like right now it'll be okay because there will still be a game in late October in Stillwater that carries national championship or playoff significance, and people are going to say, well, that's great. And it is. It is great. It's not as great as the winner-take-all Michigan-Ohio State one time rather than we're going to play this week and again next week. But there is some upside to that too. Nothing is all good and perfect in terms of a format to determine the champion in college football, and nothing is all bad. So it's time, much like it was time, to go from the bowls to the BCS. Then it was time to expand it to 4. And maybe should have expanded more then, but they didn't, and now it's certainly time to do it on. It's also time We'll get back to all of this when Bill Connelly, who's scheduled to join us, I think Stanford Steve's going to join us a little bit later on too. We'll dive back into some of this. But with the Heisman Trophy finalists being announced, the quarterbacks that were expected, and Marvin Harrison Jr., because they've committed to take 4 finalists up to this point, all terrific players, great seasons. How do you think this Heisman race is going to be remembered? There are some that are quite memorable, especially even for the winner. But there are others sometimes that the player individually was great, but you don't necessarily have that big, giant signature moment other than maybe signature plays that were fun to watch. And I guess I say this because I haven't looked at the odds. I assume Jayden Daniels is the favorite. He had a remarkable season, but because they lost their biggest games, through no fault of his, he put up numbers. He might have been a little shaky against Florida State late, but Florida State pulled away in that game. But there was a portion of that game where it looked as if LSU, would be in really good shape to win the game. And Florida State, to its credit, flexed its muscle and pulled away late. Pulled away in the second half is a better way to put it. But they lost that one. They lost to Ole Miss. They lost Alabama, and so after the Alabama loss particularly, they sort of slid off the radar. He still played well and put up numbers. Nobody else seized it, and I don't know that he's going to win it. Maybe it's going to turn out to be a really close race. How do you think this Heisman race will be remembered, or will Jayden just be on the list of, wow, he had a great season, and he'll be on the list of Heisman winners and in the fraternity?
Yeah, I think I'll remember it watching the game from Vegas, the Pac-12 championship game, because I think if Bo Nix put up a Bo Nix 28 for 34, 350 and 3 tutties that night, Bo Nix would be your Heisman winner. I'm like fairly confident in that, and I think if Michael Penix had not gone through that midseason slump, part of which is because Jalen McMillan was banged up, part of which was just they didn't play that great. I think he would have had a chance to really run away with the thing, right? If Washington if their offense had remained a runaway train, instead they won a bunch of one-score games. And I think in the end, when I was evaluating Michael Penix, I almost credited him for figuring out how to win those close games as much as I discounted him for some of the struggles, relative struggles, right? First world struggles, right, but still, like he was not as dominant. The Cal game, he wasn't great. The Arizona game, which again, in retrospect, was a good win, better win than we thought it would be at the time. Wasn't great. So I really think that it's kind of a weird race in that sense where there were a lot of stakes in that game in Vegas. I don't know. You get biased by what you saw in person, right? Boy was Penix special the day we were standing in the sideline in Seattle, right? Mm-hmm. Like he was really, really good. That misty afternoon. So no, I think it's been a little bit of a weird race. Not maybe from some different locales, which is kind of cool. I was told yesterday that Washington's he's the second Heisman finalist from Washington. Steve Entman was the other one. So you consider the firepower they've had there at the quarterback position over the years. I thought that was pretty neat. And look, if Marvin Harrison scores a touchdown on that final drive when Kyle McCord throws interception, I think his Heisman race changes the paradigm of it a little bit too. Because he had the great moment against Notre Dame where he got him down there, and Marvin Harrison's been a blast to watch. What a great player. So is Rome Odunze, by the way, and Malik Neighbors. Yeah. So, it's been a high-end receiver year in college football.
Harrison might be the best player. Daniels certainly has a claim to that. So does Penix, I think, because I think there might be some extenuating circumstances that we would hope would be alleviated in these few weeks off prior to the Sugar Bowl, where we will see, the real full boat, full strength Michael Penix. And I agree with you. I think he deserves a lot of credit for navigating his way through what, they've been very close-lipped about it, but he has looked to be in at least some degree of distress from time to time, as you watch him, whether on the field or in the sideline, and hopefully he'll be 100% for the playoff, because that's a dangerous offense, and he is a worthy candidate, and he might well lift the Heisman Trophy on Saturday night when it's announced. So I think it is going to be an unusual year, and I just hope, my party trick for people who go to boring parties of naming the Heisman Trophy winners backwards, at least until we get to the late 50s, when I sort of start getting late to mid 50s, I start getting tangled up. I'll have to remember 2023 maybe, when I'm 75 years old and I'm counting backwards to make sure we get there, because LSU sort of slipped off the radar a little bit, but Daniels certainly didn't. He's been phenomenal. And I think as you and I get ready for the NFL draft, I think there might be some people who look at him and maybe elevate him a little bit because of the way he played and the way the quarterback position is going now in the NFL, and this could work out quite well for him by the time NFL draft time rolls around.
Yeah, I did a list, Rece, or like a little quarterback primer earlier in the year of kind of where we are. It was a Caleb versus Drake, and then I kind of had a section of who's number 3. And so that might have run the first month of the season. And Jayden Daniels was not in that mix from scouts at that point. He was a guy who'd get drafted. They were going to evaluate. It's not like he came out of nowhere. But the notion of him as a high-end prospect didn't really accelerate until midseason. And give Mike Denbrock credit, give Joe Sloan, the quarterback coach at LSU, credit, give Brian Kelly credit. That guy's career had flatlined, plateaued, and even dipped at Arizona State. He did not develop when he was a quarterback at Arizona State. He started off gangbusters and then slid in the wrong direction, and I really think that they did an unbelievable job getting the most out of his talent. And that position development is so important, and it's not discussed enough, and it's not part of the analyzation enough, and I really think the hat tip to the LSU coaching staff for making sure Jayden Daniels maximized everything he could be.
We're joined now on the College Game Day podcast by the great Bill Connelly, father of SP+, knower of all things metric and analytics. Bill, you took great exception to the way the playoff was decided. Why?
You never really know what your values are in college football till they're violated, I think. And this Sunday, 85% of the things that I hold dear to college football were apparently violated on Sunday. As a college football institution, which all the different parts of that, we are a part of that. It bothers me that we made all the most cynical, this is all about ratings, people on the internet feel very, very correct. And we made the worst, most conspiracy theory-addled Florida State fans on the internet, and they are legion, correct. In all of their beliefs about how this process operates. And that alone doesn't make it wrong, but it sort of makes it feel pretty wrong. It makes it feel like there should be some self-exploration into how that came about.
I want to ask you something, though, there, because I want to, as host, one of my jobs is to push back, and it's also to give you a lifeline. You just said, unless I misunderstood what you said, that we made the conspiracy theorists from Florida State correct. That's not correct. They're not correct. Okay.
Well,
all right. Fair enough.
It made them
Go
feel
ahead.
correct. Their cynical, their most cynical possible assumption. The result of that assumption was what happened. I've met at least a few of the committee members through the years. I'm not going to pretend like they're, they were trying to be evil in everything they did. But basically, if you assumed the worst possible thing when it comes to the brands that won on Sunday, then that was, you would have guessed right. And that's problematic, even though, like I said, that doesn't automatically make it wrong, but it doesn't feel very good. But no, I mean, in the end, one of the critics, one of the main problems that critics had with moving to 12 teams here starting next year was that it'll devalue the regular season. You can lose games and it won't matter. And we decided to go ahead and ruin the integrity of the regular season from the other direction by saying it doesn't matter if you win all of your games. And I have a problem with that. I have a problem just in general. We did all this service of choosing the 4 best teams over the quote unquote most valuable, and we didn't even get the best teams. Like SP Plus, the 4 teams in the playoff right now are 1st, 6th, 7th, and 11th. FPI, it's 1st, 5th, 7th, and 13th. There's a guy, Nate Manzo, on Twitter who posts like a composite ranking of SP Plus and FPI and all the best predictive ratings or the most well-known or whatever. And that composite are 1st, 6th, 7th, and 12th. So we devalued the regular season. We chose best over most deserving, and we got neither. So I definitely have a massive problem with that. And I've said all along, like, best shouldn't be it. If we chose best, then Georgia didn't need to play on Saturday. They're still one of the 4 best teams in the country. But that doesn't mean they belong in. That doesn't mean Ohio State belongs to be to the playoff this year. But they're among the 4 best, and they didn't get in. And Alabama has not been one of the 4 best teams this year, and they did get in. So I have a problem with all that. I guess I just have a problem with, in general, we were told a lot, like, well, we've said all along we're choosing the best teams, and we're told to take injuries into account and all these things. Of course, like that, we were warned. But if this is the process we've created, and the first time in like 9 years that they had a hard decision to make, they made this decision. We need to come up with a better process.
As obvious as you believe it is, because here's the thing. I said prior to Sunday that neither decision, and it was pretty apparent, all due respect to Georgia, and I understand what you're saying, and I actually agree with if you're picking, who might win the game. Certainly Georgia would probably be the pick or favorite over just about everybody, if not all of them. But if you're looking at this from that standpoint, then what is it as obvious this way? Because everybody defines best differently. How I've defined best is I've used the analogy several times of it's a mosaic, and you have 13 people in the room, and as they put their mosaic together, maybe for some it is purely resume based or overwhelmingly majority resume based, and others it's you're asked the coaches in the room, I don't want to play this team, so that's a little more important to that person. And then you wind up with this result. Because I thought the great Brad Edwards, who longtime friend of mine, used to work for us, follows this stuff, had a really fascinating point on Twitter, on X, whatever I'm supposed to say now, on Sunday, saying that as it pertains to Florida State, that logically you almost have to be in one of 2 camps. They're either 3rd or they're 7th, meaning that because if you base it on the fact that they're undefeated, accomplished in Power 5 conference, then they're 3rd. If you are more on the line of, hey, wait a minute, Jordan Travis is hurt, the strength of schedule is, despite 2 good non-conference games, still mediocre, and lesser than the other ones, save Washington, I think, where they're closer to that band. Then they're 7th. And the first thing that occurred to me after Brad put that is, and I saw that in the aftermath of the rankings reveal, is like the average of 3rd and 7th is 5th. And that and don't misunderstand what I'm saying here, either Florida State fans who are just looking for more fodder to get mad. I'm not saying that makes it right. I'm saying that is a possible way that we arrived at this, that you had a number of those 13 in there saying, no. They're 3rd. They're undefeated. They're 13-0. They've accomplished it. As Pete pointed out earlier in the podcast, they've got a fantastic defense. They might win the game 10-7. Against whoever they're playing, and that's fine. And there are others going, I can't live with the diminished offense, and you wound up with this result, which is part of having the committee as opposed to having a formula spit it out. Because as you pointed out, the formulas that we have wouldn't have spit out, at least the predictive ones, wouldn't have spit out anything like this. Yours, for instance, would have Penn State in. And I know you're not advocating for that. So but I only put that out there to say there is a difficulty in finding the formula, because there are times after this I said, we'd be better off with the formula. But but then the formula, we've seen that in the BCS era time and time again, that the formula came out with things that made you question the logic of it.
Can I just throw one fly in this here? And some of this stuff is like with the formulas and everything is a little over my head. But I feel like this being the last year of the system gave the committee a pass, because they're going to set a precedent with this that they're never going to have to revert back to. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, and I mean, that's absolutely right. Like next year, if this was a 12-team playoff this year, then we would have been complaining that Florida State didn't get a bye. So obviously now they have margin for error. That doesn't mean they got it right. And that doesn't mean...
Well, they probably would have given it to them because they just wanted... They were in. You know what I mean? Like
right.
In this, they didn't want them in.
Right. Like, two things from what you guys just said, two things that I wrote about in the Monday piece. One of them was, like Kenyon Martin, Cincinnati, the famous example in the NCAA tournament from 20 whatever years ago.
Yeah, no.
God, that has
we have to remind people of a couple of things when you bring that one up. One, that Cincinnati was the toast of college basketball at one time, and Kenyon Martin was really good at it.
That was the classic example of he gets hurt, so they were able to just kind of bump them to a 2 seed. They would have probably been like the number 1 team overall with him, or they were the number 1 team overall with him, and he breaks his leg, so they're a 2 seed. Obviously, you have more margin for error now, but that doesn't mean we didn't just kind of wreck the legitimacy of the entire process for a lot of fans out there who aren't SEC fans or Alabama fans or whatever, and that does matter. And as far as formulas go, I will say too, like when last year when I was getting a little frustrated with the week-to-week rankings, I decided, like, you know what, I'm going to come up with a BCS. What would a BCS style formula look like in 2022? And I basically it was half polls, it was half. It was 2 predictive ratings, SP Plus and FPI, and it was 2 resume ratings, my resume, SP Plus, and strength of record. So you mash all those together, you get kind of a best/most deserving kind of deal. You factor in the poll rankings, and last week, the second to last rankings, you had exactly the top 10 that the playoff committee produced. Even though Florida State had just played Florida without Jordan Travis, with Tate Rodemaker in there, and they were exactly where that formula would have predicted them. This week, in the last set of rankings, it had the top 13 exactly correct, except for one exception, and I'll give you a guess as to what that exception was. Even though the quarterback Florida State played in this game wasn't going to be the quarterback that played in the playoff, they got bumped because of how bad the offense looked with this guy who wasn't going to play. And everything else checked out perfectly. Resumes, it even had Texas third, which kind of honestly surprised me a little bit, although that was mainly because the polls just coalesced completely with Texas suddenly being third. But that formula gave us all exactly the same rankings, except one very, very, very important exception. And like I said, it fulfilled all the worst possible assumptions about college football in this process, and I kind of hate that. I think that's gonna. I don't know. Ratings are gonna be great. Just because people are more cynical now than they were before doesn't mean they're gonna stop watching. Like that, maybe nothing changes, but I don't like the precedent that we just gave a lot of people, and
ratings. Ratings. Let me point out one quick thing. Ratings would have been great if Florida State had been in too. I think that's important. And
we're not talking about.
And the other thing too. I'm looking at and I know your formula might be more complex or whatever, but the strength of record formula. You think this made people mad? If we'd gone strictly off ESPN's strength of record, which has no eyes, it's a formula, and you spit it out. Florida State would have been in, but so would Alabama, and Texas would have been left out, and that would have been controversial as well. So,
but the undefeated 13-0 team would have gotten to play till they lose, and that would have. That was the one thing to me. That was one of the biggest things a playoff was supposed to fix. There was not going to be any more 2004 Auburns.
Yeah, and that's the thing though. It's really it tests people because for years there have been a number of people on our show who have said You can't just say the 0 is better than the 1. You can't say that the 1 is better than the 2. You have to use some evaluation technique in this. And now you find out if people really believe that.
Yeah. No, and I think basically, to me, the 0 still matters. The 1 versus 2, obviously, then we start getting into who would beat whom. To me, in my head, that's how it works. But if you haven't lost, you get to play till you lose. And
okay, well, let me play devil's advocate, because I had a couple of people in position saying, okay, then why should anybody schedule?
Why should anybody play their stars on senior night?
Why? That's the question. But you get the point. I think the counter to that is every season plays out differently. And if you're applying it to Alabama, for instance, and said they had played Texas A&M Corpus Christi instead of playing Texas, they would have won. But in all likelihood, that team would have then just traded the Texas loss. That team sort of needed something to calibrate itself. They probably just traded it for a different loss. So, I don't really buy that type of argument. But the fact remains, though, that I agree with almost everything you say, except the 0 is greater than the 1 by definition. Now, it may still be in Florida State's case. And Florida State has no issue with the schedule. Heck, they played 2 SEC teams, and the ACC had a winning record against the SEC.
Yeah.
But, according to all of the formulas, the rest of their schedule was not as difficult as Alabama's by 50 spots. That doesn't mean Alabama should have gotten in, but it does illustrate the point of whether we want the 0 to trump the 1 always if they're in a certain set of conferences instead of an individual one, because that's the bulk of the schedule. It's not because of the logo that you have on your jersey with the conference affiliation. It's because that is the bulk of your schedule. And so you look at it and you say, do you want that? And if you don't, then you're going to allow some subjectivity of a committee to evaluate. And if you do, then maybe we should revert to the formula. So what's the answer? Would you, in the 12-team era, would you return to a formula to determine the other at-large teams as opposed to the committee?
Absolutely, I would. Because I realized, I was using ESPN tools, and we'd have to be very careful about, in an official process, maybe SP Plus and FPI wouldn't exactly be eligible for such a process, but. Like I said, just purely using 2 best and 2 most deserving formulas and mashing them together with poll results, you get basically the same thing, but the differences going through the years were pretty interesting and noticeable. And just looking at the differences, I side towards the formula most of the time if it was Team A versus Team B. So yeah, I would absolutely. We know, like, the biggest problem with the BCS formula was coming down to the number 2, as in you could only pick 2 teams, and obviously that would have been a problem with a completely poll-based process too. But the formula did its job pretty well, and aside from the fact where when the humans disagreed, they changed the formulas and they neutered the formulas. You can't use margin of victory anymore to determine quality, that kind of stuff, even though that's the best measure of quality you can find. That was the only part of the formula that I didn't like.
Well, what, Bill, what happened was, and it's one of the reasons we got to a committee, and it was I think it was the one thing, I thought people overreacted to the BCS in terms of being evil. Yeah. But what happened was people in charge got nervous about public opinion, and so they were constantly revising the formula, tweaking, taking out margin of victory, whatever it might be, to try to account for a unique set of circumstances. And by definition, unique means they won't occur again, and they won't occur again precisely in that same way.
Right.
And you say, see, don't worry, we'll never again have 2000 where Florida State gets in over Miami despite having the same record and having lost to Miami. We fixed that now in the formula. Well, when you kind of retroactively fix all these formulas, to me, not knowing all the formulas as you do, but just people watching it, undermines the credibility of the formula. And so I doubt we go back to the formula. Maybe we should, and you make a very compelling case as to why maybe we should. But if we do, here would be the piece of advice that I would give to the people in charge. Say, this formula may not be foolproof. Certainly it won't satisfy everybody, but it is the best formula we can possibly come up with, and it is going to be right or closer to right or more fair, more just, whatever word you want to use, 99% of the time. And hopefully we'll never have to live with the 1%, but if we do, we have so much confidence in this formula that we're sticking with it. That's what gave all of the BCS critics the fodder, is that they kept changing it, and by definition, that meant you didn't believe in it. So if we go back to it, find one we believe in and go all in.
Yeah, it means to the critics, you're correct. This formula is terrible.
Right.
We'll try to make it better. Yeah, no, like put in a formula and basically say, we're not changing this for 10 years, so live with it. You can't question it. This is now the rule of law for the next 10 years. And I mean, honestly, if we were to go in that direction, it wouldn't be hard to go back and say, like, here's where I would have disagreed with I don't know if you'd want to do this. This would be a whole new can of worms. But basically being able to produce 10 years of results, saying here's what it would have produced over the last 10 years. So the differences. We know the precedents. And
how about this?
Live with it, 'cause this is what's happening.
I've boxed out Pete here, and I apologize for that. One more thing. What about this? Because even though I'm an AP poll voter, I'm not sure that those normal polls would be the right ones to put in there. What if you did this? What if you constructed the formula and you had the committee? They wouldn't have to get to. I guess maybe they could at the end, but you still had the committee. Not that the committee could trump it, but the committee's evaluation, the committee's results, then carried a certain weight within the formula. That they got together, they evaluated some of the things that would actually be in the formula. They applied some subjective judgment instead of just a bunch of people, including, me in the AP poll. But even though it was not AP poll back then, I think it wasn't, because the AP removed, they removed itself from it.
Ended up being the Harris poll.
That's what the Harris poll sort of attempted to do. But if you went with the with the committee, and they went through their process just as they do now, which is a pretty good process of evaluation because we've all been through it. They go through it, they get their results, and that is the quote-unquote human component of the formula. That's the result that goes into it. It carries whatever weight is deemed appropriate, and then it goes with all of the other objective measures of the formulas.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're right. I mean, that was kind of what the Harris poll was trying to do, except but you filtered out like a bunch of the media people who follow the sport the most, and you filter out coaches and all this other stuff, and it was just kind of whoever's left can vote in this poll. But no, like I would say either make it as big a poll as possible, or if you think it would add to legitimacy to basically say it's these 20 people. You don't have to stick to whatever it is, 12 or whatever, but make it 20 or 25 or something, and basically say like they're gonna have a Zoom call every Sunday morning, and then they're all gonna vote, and that's gonna be the human component. Like that's fine. But I do think Heather Denich's piece from Monday, it seems like one of the playoff spots was at least partially determined by a bunch of people sitting in a room watching television and going, ew, to Florida State's offense. And that isn't part of the guidelines. Even though at the same time, Florida State was playing the best defense in the country, making Louisville's offense look atrocious in a way. Like, it's been an up and down offense. Hasn't looked that bad, anywhere close to that bad all year. Florida State's defense was doing that. But it was just the half of the game when Florida State had the ball with a quarterback who wasn't going to be playing in the playoff that determined a playoff spot. And that's why the human element alone isn't good enough, I don't think.
Pete, take us someplace else.
I want to know this from Bill. Just give me a quick snapshot of the playoff matchups, because they are great matchups. Yep. And again, I understand the sewer that the committee left us to Shawshank through, and I respect it, and I really feel awful for those left in the waste. But we have good games. And eventually we're going to really spend a lot of time dialing in on these games. We're going to do deep dives with scouts and numbers and analysis. But I just want like your what's your quick blush off this?
Yeah, I mean it is. I mean, there's no question both matchups are interesting, especially because it's the specific pairings that we got too. It feels like offenses have the advantage in the Texas-Washington game. It feels like defenses have the advantage in the Alabama-Michigan game. So it's kind of, something for everybody. Again, defenses would have had the advantage if Florida State was there too. But I'm moving on. I am going to move on now. I'm going to make sure my Alabama-Michigan preview doesn't have 38 Florida State references in it. I'm gonna officially kind of wipe the slate clean. But I mean,
hard drive.
but you look at the matchups for Michigan, Alabama specifically. I mean, both teams we know are going to run the ball. They, top 20 in run rate on first down. They really want to establish that aspect of the game. Alabama is going to be doing it against a Michigan defense that is fourth in rushing success rate allowed, as good as you're going to find against the run. Granted, it's Big Ten style running game, but Alabama's got some Big Ten in them this year. But then on the other side, you got a Michigan team that doesn't have Zach Zinter, and has played a ton of elite defenses and hasn't really run the ball very well against them, and has relied on J.J. McCarthy to come up with very specific passes in very specific moments to kind of keep the chains moving. And I don't exactly know how that plays out. Alabama's got, Michigan has most of the advantages on paper in terms of efficiency and success rate and red zone and field position, all that stuff. Alabama makes the big plays. And it could just simply come down to, does Jalen Milroe complete one deep ball or two? Just little things like that really could make the difference in the game. I am floored. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not floored that Alabama, that it's basically even in the sports books right now. A week ago, it would have been like Michigan -6 because, for all we talk about form and peaking at the right time, Alabama played its second worst game of the year a week and a half ago. But, SP Plus sees Michigan with clearly obvious advantages here overall. I don't trust that at all because it's Alabama in the playoff and it's Michigan in the playoff and Alabama makes all the big plays. But it is a really interesting matchup there. And like I said, I'll stop complaining. It's going to be fun.
And the other one, Texas-Washington?
Yeah, I mean, that one, Washington, I've been catching flack for, from Washington fans this week because, shockingly, because, Oregon was better than Washington the other 11 games of the season, but lost 2 toss-ups, but is still ahead of Washington in basically any predictive metric on the planet because of that. But Washington, there's no question. I even wrote it, I think, in my preview last week. Like, I think Oregon's a better team, but if it's close in the fourth quarter, Washington's going to win. Washington knows what they're doing in those situations, and they seem to just relax. Like, Michael Penix can look completely off kilter and off timing for a quarter and a half, but if we got to score on this drive, we're going to go score on this drive. And it was incredible watching what they were doing. I'm not sure Dylan Johnson's going to be as much of a factor in this game because Texas's defensive line is rough. And so it will probably come down to Penix in the passing game. I think Texas is the steadier team here. But Penix in the passing game, every time they've needed to do something, they've done it. And I'm not going to be all that surprised if they do it again. Texas is a better team. I think we end up with, I guess, Texas, Michigan. I'm never, ever feeling comfortable. My joke for years has been I always pick Alabama, and I'm almost always right. But I do think Michigan's been the better team this year. But I think Texas is the best team here
Shades
too. And
of
Washington
that
could win it anyway.
Famous Rose Bowl before the most famous Rose Bowl. If we get Michigan and Texas in the championship game, the one in which Michigan beat Texas.
Yeah, we're guaranteed fun matchups here. Alabama Texas rematch, an old school Michigan Washington. They played in the Rose Bowl a bunch. No matter what the pairing is, we're gonna get something fun in the final.
No question about it, Bill. Pleasure, man. Always enjoy your stuff. Give everybody a lot of things to think about, and maybe we should put you in charge of establishing how the committee operates or how the selections are made from this point forward as we embark on the 12-team era.
Just let me discontinue my Twitter account, and I'll get right on that.
I'm
not going to be on. I don't want to be on Twitter.
Sitting in the stands at the Jaguars game the other night listen, the Florida State people, nobody, fine, no problem. It was the Georgia guy. Some Georgia guy came by all mad, stopped, give me the mean mug, and like, dog should have been in. And I was like, Enjoy the game. Nice to see you. I'm just trying to figure.
Rece, why did you keep Georgia out? I mean,
That's
come
right.
on.
What?
You jerk. Did you get like some bad takeout in Athens when we were there for game day?
You and I had a delightful dinner at Chuck's Fish. Athens, I mean,
We did.
I mean, that's the funny thing. We're paid to opine, and there are a number of people who feel like that we had some say in this process. I was asked, and I'll leave Bill on this now. I was asked a while ago, I forgot what show it was on, and they asked if I thought that we as a show, we as commentators, as many who have been in the sport, covering the sport, being, part of the growth and popularity through television of the sport, if I felt that we had any power. And my response was define power. I said, if you mean, do I think that someone says something on College Game Day, whether it's me, and certainly, if it's Kirk, Des, or Pat, given their, or Stanford Steve, who all of whom played, if we say something on there, does it give the power brokers, the decision makers, something to think about and go, wow, Kirk Herbstreit really feels strongly about this. Maybe I should look at it. Then I would say the answer is yes, there is power. If you mean by power that we make phone calls, dictate to somebody, or have such influence over grown, successful human beings that they are going to align themselves with whatever opinion was offered on Game Day or on any other ESPN platform, then no, I don't think we have that power. Do we have the power to make people evaluate their stance? I think so. Yeah, I think that's probably fair. But I also think that all of those people in the committee room and all the conference commissioners, all those people are accomplished human beings. They didn't rise to the level of where they are by being so weak-spined that they're going to listen to Mr. Television Announcer and decide that that's where they're going to align themselves. Might it make them think? Yeah, but it should. I mean, that's what we all do. We may all have an opinion on something outside of sports. We read a book, we read an article, we hear a podcast, and we go, And then we evaluate as to whether we agree with that, what parts of it that might merit consideration, and what parts of it are dismissed. That's just life. Bill, I'm sorry, I opined.
Steve's power, Rece, you're underestimating. He has the power to make the team opposite of which he picks win. I mean, that has been clear week in, week out on College Game Day this year.
We welcome into the pod the great Stanford Steve, wearing a beanie from the farm and wearing the belt of a champion. It's not a belt. I've learned that. An award, right? It's an award.
Yep.
So you're wearing the award of a champion, having picked the winner. Steve, congratulations on that. After my dismal performance, I was one game behind, and then you blew me out of the water the last week in the picks. So congratulations.
The real ones don't judge you on the fridge. The real ones judge you on the pod.
That's
so
right.
If you do get occasionally needled for your picks, just point. I think Taylor, we need to get a graphic of Steve's final things because Steve picked some good games this year, man. I give him a lot of credit.
How did the last fridge come out on Game Day, Steve?
Of course, Rece. 1-1.
1-1. Are you serious? 1-1. Oh my goodness.
How many winning fridges did you have this year?
0.
Wow,
that's hard to do.
Hard to do.
I hope. Did Herbstreit finish the Superdog thing with only one cover the entire season? I don't know if he got. I don't know what he picked Saturday. I can't. I really hope he didn't win for a number of reasons.
Did I sneak?
But
I was hoping I snuck in the second.
You could have, because I punted and had some fun because I was actually with you with the outright.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, my
Red Hawks.
My original pick was Miami, Ohio for Big Red, but then it didn't seem fun that that it was just like guys had the same pick. So I said, what's the biggest spread in the FCS playoffs that could maybe get me back in this with Corso? And Mercer was getting like 33.5. I was like, hey, maybe those Mercer Bears from Albany, Georgia, from Macon, Georgia would go. No, they didn't. They got beat like 1,000-0, so they didn't cover softballs. But anyway, that was fun. But listen, we want everybody to have their shot at this, and we've spent a lot of time with Bill talking formulas, philosophy, how the committee should look at this going forward, whether it was appropriate. What did you think? Florida State rather than Alabama?
We watched the SEC game together, all of us, and I thought our feelings were pretty entrenched of how impressive both teams were. I didn't have a problem with the decision. And all I'll say is this. For 10 years, this is what we were supposed to have. 4 spots, 5 conferences, and others. And when there's more than 4 qualified teams, you got to rank them. And that's what – I mean, it's a shame, or maybe it's not for the team that's left out, but 4 spots and more than 4 qualifiers, somebody's getting left out and somebody's going to really be hurt. And it just didn't happen. We didn't have enough qualified teams in years prior. And when I looked at what happened Saturday and the totality of it all, I agreed with the committee.
I think I said Florida State rather than Alabama, but what I meant was obviously those who thought that Florida State should have been picked rather than Alabama. It's interesting because we just had 2 people on here, Pete, and you and I have our judgments of the situation. 2 people who follow this sport as closely as anyone, who are super smart guys who look at it differently. And I don't know that there could be anything more a greater illustration of what is likely to go on in that committee room. And it's the one thing, and I think I've said this a few times, that does bother me when people start acting as if the committee makes this nefarious decision collectively. Think about who you're talking about in there. You're saying Jim Grobe. Yeah. Jim Grobe, it has some agenda and is trying to get someone in. Joe Taylor, is trying to. That's not the way. That's the only thing I take exception to. I'm here all for it, for the people who are unhappy with the decision and think it was wrong and think that is completely reasonable, and disagreeing with it. The part that does bother me is when it bleeds into the area of questioning the integrity of the people who are sitting in that committee room. That's patently unfair, because Steve, you made the greatest point. Somebody is, by definition, and Pete said it earlier in the podcast, and Pete's been on this from back before he saw the light and came to work for us instead of working for others. Pete, the math wasn't right. But the one thing I will say about that is that this sport, for better or worse, moves like a big battleship, a giant battleship. It doesn't make hairpin turns. In my entire life, the greatest hairpin turn they've made is this move from 4 to 12. Skip 6, skip 8, go to 12. And typically it moves very slowly. I mean, think of all the years that it was the bowls. This is patently unfair. Had a prominent Miami alumnus reach out and start talking about 2000, when Miami got left out in favor of Florida State, and perhaps because of some long-held ill feelings toward Florida State, brought up 1993, when Florida State lost to Notre Dame, same record, yet won the national championship. None of those things are relevant now. But the one thing it does illustrate is that this sport has a long, long history of controversial decisions in terms of crowning champions. So this part of it's not new, but this 12-team at long last hairpin turn that's coming is going to alleviate a lot of that, because when you play this many rounds of playoffs and you have this many teams that will get into the mix, there's going to be somebody furious, when a Liberty gets in with the 133rd schedule. There'll be somebody furious, but they're still going to be talking about the last seed in. But anyway.
A couple things. My first time at the SEC championship game, I cannot wait to have full ownership of that extravaganza. Just to see it. I mean, the weather couldn't be worse outside. I thought we were blessed to have the setting we had. I go over with Pat and Kirk to do the field goal, and, we're all the way in the corner of the convention center, and we come back, and I'm like, oh, boy, this is – it's like, 11:10, and that kickoff's at 4 o'clock. Just awesome to have it there, and the idea of 2 fan bases here in that building, loud as hell every play because it's 50-50. Although I thought there was a little more Georgia, but that didn't matter in the end. The one thing I was going to say, Pete, are the dates announced for the 12 team, like when the games are?
So I was actually going to ask. Rece this, like, where would we be next year when Bill was on earlier at this moment? Because I believe Army Navy keeps its own day still, and the Heisman keeps its own day. And I guess if we work backwards, looking at a calendar here, you can tell I didn't take any math classes at Syracuse. I mean, one of the problems was there was always going to be games like around Christmas.
Yeah.
And it's also because of wild cards, some of the games are going to be like on Thursdays and Fridays. And this is, again, like schedule minutia that were like big stories in the summer that I haven't thought about in a little while. But I guess if you go 3 weeks, so this year, are there do you go like 21, 22, December 21, 22, which is a Thursday, Friday? Rece is better at this stuff. When I started working at ESPN, I realized two things. One, people talk about scheduling a lot more than at any other job, and people talk about ratings a lot more than any other job. And I don't know a lot about scheduling and ratings, so I should probably keep it that way.
I'm looking at, and I had to look this up, the next year, the first round on-campus games, there will be one on Friday, December 20th. And there will be 3 on Saturday, December 21st.
Wow.
So we'll be on a College Game Day site.
Sure. No
on
question.
Saturday, December 21st.
I'm sure. Yeah.
That will be very cool.
That'll be awesome. It'll be fun. And then
Steve will be wearing that hat, actually.
Yeah, just for the quarterfinals then, one quarterfinal on New Year's Eve. It'll be the Fiesta Bowl. And then the Peach Bowl, Rose Bowl, Sugar Bowl will have a triple header on New Year's Day of quarterfinals. And then you go into what Pete was talking about, the Thursday, Friday semifinals. And I want to talk transfer portal after this, but we can give you one other little thing. Our coaches, they've got plenty of time, by the way, because they have like 10 or 11 days to get ready for the national championship game. The winning coach from the Friday game as opposed to the winning coach from the Thursday game, you can lay money. Here's your prop bet right here. You can guarantee that whoever wins that Friday night game will say in the aftermath, well, Team X, whoever they're playing the following week, they got a head start on us.
Yeah,
so
they're already ahead.
Already ahead. We're fighting an uphill battle here. So anyway, that'll be fun.
The only thing more predictable would be Kate Thamel being like, wait a minute. You have to go away the week of Christmas, the week after Christmas,
again?
then the next week, then the next week.
Yeah, at least we should have a little bit of Christmas after that because it's New Year's Day and New Year's Eve. Okay, let's dive into portal real quick before we wrap up with Army Navy. It's spinning, the Kyle McCord thing we touched on a little bit earlier this week. A lot of guys from Ohio State. What else? What's the biggest thing you're seeing in the portal right now, Peter?
Well, there's 90-plus quarterbacks, and I don't know how many of those 90-plus are like thumper starters to really, to really change your program. USC has been flirting around Cam Ward. They've been flirting around Will Howard. Oregon, it looks like Dylan Gabriel is a heavy favorite to go there. Washington's in a unique spot. I've heard a lot of Will Rogers buzz there, although that's not done. That's just buzz. Ohio State, Devin Brown gets an audition in the bowl game, right? It'll be really interesting to see if they jump in the sweepstakes. All these blue bloods who have, if you look at Malachi Nelson at SC with Miller Moss, for example, you have these guys, you've recruited them for 3 years.
Yeah.
They come, you develop them. You have to play the 3-card Monty of, okay, he comes in, then you lose your room. We saw it a little bit at Notre Dame last year when Hartman came in. Mm-hmm. They had future lacrosse All-American Tyler Buckner leave, and then they obviously had Drew Pine leave as well. So these are really difficult decisions because it's easy for us to sit there and say, oh, he's going to go there, he's going to go there. But you got years of relationships built. You got trust in the high school coach. You got it. So it's for a place like Ohio State, the do they or they don't they, in a place like USC, Washington has a really good young player on campus. I think Dylan Morris, and then they got a 5-star committed from the Sacramento area. Does that change the calculus too? What if Carson Beck leaves Georgia? I mean, he's a solid prospect who was rising. He didn't play great in the SEC title game, but that could be open. Florida State's in the market. There's a couple guys that they've looked at there. There's a little bit of buzz of DJ Uiagalelei, but I think he's a little down their list. LSU is probably going to go with Garrett Nussmeier, who's been the longtime backup, who I think is a really talented guy. Riley Leonard is on the campus at Notre Dame as we speak. I was told his great grandfather played football at Notre Dame, and that appears to be fated, but it's not done until it's done in this. I think at places like you can go start at Iowa, you can go start at Wisconsin, you can go start at Miami. Louisville picked up Tyler Shuck last night, a talented, hard luck guy who just, I was looking back, he had broken collarbone, re-injured that shoulder the next year, and then this year had a broken fibula. So it'll be interesting to see if Jeff Brom, who, by the way, should always be a top veteran portal target for quarterbacks because they huck it. He's a great play caller. So anyway, that's in Oklahoma. Do they go with Hawkins or one of the young guys, or do they go back to the portal? So the future of college football in 2024 is being shaped in these upcoming weeks at the quarterback position.
One question, Pete. I saw, I think it was after the Wisconsin-Minnesota game. I just saw it this week. But Fickell talking about the idea of this 6 and 7 year plan for players, I thought was really, really interesting. And then I see Cam Rising coming back to Utah, 7 years.
Yeah,
7 years. He was a part of the recruiting class at Tom Herman's second year at Austin. Is there a line for the COVID year?
So I keep looking back, there's if you are now 21, 22, 23, if you're now a true junior, you don't have the COVID.
Okay.
So I do a lot of these breaking transfer things, and it's literally like counting on my fingers. And then if you got injured, like Shuck, that's where you get the 7th. That's where you had Jayden Daniels.
Yep.
He ended up with 6 because of the redshirt. But yeah, but I mean, Tyler Shuck started in 18.
Yeah.
So he was COVID was middle of his career. He started 7 games in the COVID season. So
any inside link where Buckner's going to go play lacrosse?
So I had seen Inside Lacrosse, who knows lacrosse better than any publication, report that he was going to go back to Notre Dame.
All right.
I've not confirmed that
National
yet.
champions.
Boo Corrigan's brother, Kevin, is the lacrosse coach at Notre Dame because it all comes back to college football.
Right.
The question I would have about Tyler, because I don't know what his graduation status is he through with football? Or is he going back to lacrosse, in the interim, while the year he would have to sit for football? Because my understanding is he'd be immediately eligible in a different sport. But, that would be interesting too. But anyway, it's a fascinating time with all of the moves, and that's how Kyle McCord, I guess somehow, I don't know how real this was, linked with Nebraska. Certainly that would be an upgrade. And it sort of blows my mind. I mean, people are going to have judgments about players, and players, certainly, especially at that position, want to know that their coaching staff believes in them. But it's a fascinating thing that a guy can start every game in a season at Ohio State in which they were in the national championship race, number 1 for a portion of the season, have the ball in the big house, driving for the win, throw an interception, didn't work out, and you're in the portal. I mean, and don't misunderstand when I lay that out. That is not a criticism of Kyle McCord. I'm good with the portal. It's a short, I know even with the 6 and 7 years, it is still a relatively short period of time, short careers that these guys have. You need to be able to do these things. This may change when things are collectively bargained, because I think I might have pointed out on the podcast earlier this week, by definition, collective bargaining means you have to give up something. And it could be to get some of this trust money, revenue sharing, whatever it comes to with the latest thing from the NCAA, that the thing that is given up is some of this freedom, or maybe there are stipulations or conditions, further stipulations or conditions that are put on movement, and that might come with getting paid. But in the interim, when it's just NIL and it sort of flows, it's only sort of flowing one way in terms of revenue distribution from media rights and all of that kind of thing, and schools not treating players as employees. As long as we are there and it hasn't been collectively bargained out, I'm on the side of the players. If they need to move, they need to move. I mean, that's the way it is, because there are plenty of coaches who have called guys in. Steve, you know this as well as anyone because of your connection with virtually everyone in the sport. There are plenty of times when guys get called in and said, you're a good guy. You can stay here as long as you want, but understand you're not playing. Understand you're never playing. Understand that if everyone at your position gets hurt, we're going down to the Sigma Nu house and we're going to get a guy who's lying on his bed and we're going to play him before you, but you can stay. And that's sort of the hinted way of going, yeah, you can, but we really, 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 really want you to leave. That's happened forever. And
no doubt.
And so that's why I tend to be on the side of the players in this, as they try to find the best situation for them. You don't have much of that. Not much of it at all with Army and Navy. What's your experience? Have you been to your Army Navy extravaganza?
Yeah,
before?
I've been to 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And it's one of the few things in sports, Rece, that lives up to it every time. No matter what it is on the field, what the records are, the build-up. I can't wait to be on the set for game day with you guys. Boston, the 250-year anniversary of the Revolution. That's why it's there. I think that's super cool. And I'm not a Boston fan in any way. Celtics, Red Sox, nothing. Never been a fan of them. But when they do an event and they have a special celebration, it's hard to find anybody that does it better. So, being at Gillette, knowing how great that stadium is, and just the idea of what comes with this game, you can't ever doubt any scenario, whoever's going to show up. And it's fantastic. The idea of togetherness that everybody has in these service academies is switching to the idea of hate for one day is awesome. And, I got family at the Naval Academy now. I'm living in Maryland now. I've been down here a while. I was always the guy, probably because it was uniform-based, but growing up in Connecticut, West Point was less than 2 hours. I was always the guy that rooted for Navy. I don't know. I think it was the uniforms. I like the Navy and gold better than the cadets, and I just always had an affinity. I grew up. We were fortunate enough to have some older guys in my town of Ansonia that were part of the Army, and as bitty basketball, Little League baseball, our all-star teams would go up to West Point and play. It's funny. I texted Jess Sims. She went up there to do a feature for us. In the gym that she's in, I played a basketball game, and I recognized it like nothing. And those memories are something I'll never forget, playing against, lieutenants' sons and stuff like that. So I can't be more fired up to end the season here. I think it's the perfect, we talk about all the stuff with the sport. This is a great way to end it, and it's awesome. Like I said, every single time it lives up to it, and not more fired up.
Not long after I came to ESPN, we have a guy who's worked in the research department, just a wonderful human being, tremendous at his job, man called Paul Kenny. And Paul's dad was a long-time SID in Army. And as Paul and I were working together in my early days at ESPN, even before I was covering college football, I was working on the car racing show. And before that, even the Sports Smash, Paul and I became friendly, found out, that, both loved college football. His dad worked in Army and or had worked in Army. And so in 1998, Army was playing that undefeated Tulane team. And it so happened that I didn't have to work that Saturday, and Paul graciously took me to West Point to see everything that weekend and to see the game. And sitting in Michie Stadium and looking out and being able to see the Hudson and think, man, Blanchard and Davis and Pete Dawkins, and all those, they played down there. And, just the setting was so pure and throwback. And while it is certainly different playing in the NFL stadiums in which Army and Navy play in now, the atmosphere for it's cool. The game day in the morning is great. with the Corps and the Brigade showing up, or so many of them showing up. You're really inspired. I think
Yes.
and it becomes trite because, we say those things, but it's really not if you experience it and you kind of really stop and think about the schedule that all of the people at both academies go through, but particularly if you're a football player, and then also looking at the success that both programs have had, over the last several years, and the way, Navy has, competed in some years when Ken Niumatalolo was there. They were in the mix, for the American championship. And when Army took a great Oklahoma team, in Norman, right down to the end, and Army's done that under Jeff Monken a number of times. It's, the level of football that they're able to play, while it's still not being the number one priority for those players by necessity. It can't be, because there are so many other demands. It's still really, really important. But they have so many other demands that if football is number one to them, it has to be co-number one. There are other things that get equal billing for those guys.
And that's the thing here in this college football world we're in, Rece. You got 5 stars, going on visits and choosing a school. These guys playing in an Army-Navy game chose this. And for many of them, it was their first choice. That's all you need to know about the type of person that that lines up Saturday. It's a different person. It's a person I just respect the hell out of. And you talk about being inspired, exactly, because you think about the choices these guys made when in a spot where you do have a choice, and this is the road these guys have taken. Hats off. Like that it doesn't get any more stronger than that.
Now, you said that you have an interesting proposition resulting from the Army and Navy game. What have you got there?
So plenty has been made of the over-under, right? And now we are in Iowa territory with this game, with a total being posted of 27.5. The line actually moved up this morning. Army is -3 now. But I will ask you, do you want to take the over or under on first half total points? And that number is 13.5.
13.5 first half points?
Yes.
I'm going to take
both teams combined.
I'm going to take the under.
Okay.
I mean, that would be, I'm trying to think of the score. That would be 7-3, 7-6. That feels right. 10-3 would get me home.
The half. I think the half is big because knowing this game and seeing it so many times, the idea of avoiding a big play, you have to do it. And like 2 years ago at MetLife, Navy busted. I think it was second or third play of the game, touchdown. That changes the whole thing. And if you could ever go up 2 scores, and then it's a whole different animal. But that, and then in the red zone, where these guys get their first downs inside the red zone is so key between holding them to 3 or ultimately giving up that 7 that both teams are not fit to overcome multiple of those. So it's just fascinating. Just lining it up and how fast it goes. I mean, that clock, you look up and never feels like it stops with those guys wanting to churn the legs. And the idea of just how familiar they are with each other obviously factors into everybody loving to bet the under in that.
It's that is the thing, because it's a year-round deal. It's obviously on all the walls, but it's a real year-round deal. It's not. There are other rivalries. Ohio State, Michigan, certainly to a large degree, that's year-round. But it just feels it feels different in terms of this. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad we're going back. We didn't go last year, and I'm glad that we're back. It's going to be a fun morning. It's
always I talked about being able to go up to West Point when I was young. I think, what's the high platform in the pool that's not the springboard? Is it like the high one?
The platform. You mean how high is it? I think it's 10 meters.
Yeah.
It's 10 meters.
10 meters?
I think, yeah.
Whatever that high one is, we had the chance to go off of that, and guys are jumping off the springboard doing flips. We're 13, 14 years old. And I asked if we could go up to the top. And this is before I knew I was afraid of heights.
And you found out then?
You're up there, and you literally look down into this giant pool. And in the bottom of the pool, what does it say? Beat Navy.
Yeah.
And I said, we could go up there and go off of that. And the commander was like, you're in West Point. You can do whatever you want, boy. You got inside the walls. You can do whatever you want. So sure enough, we all jumped off. And like I said, it's just stuff you never forget. But yeah, it's awesome to see the different places where it says beat Army or beat Navy on either campus. Both campuses are just incredible. I get over to Annapolis whenever I can just to walk around. It's that special of a place to me. So we'll take it up to Boston and we'll figure it out.
And we'll bring it to you Saturday morning on College Game Day. Steve, always a pleasure. Pete working on some breaking news. Keep an eye on ESPN.com for that. This has been the College Game Day Podcast. We urge you to subscribe or download wherever you prefer to get your podcast.